afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the fantasy football season. Here at RotoBaller.com, I'm your host, Anthony Aniano. You recognize me if you've been watching the Fantasy Baseball Waiver Wire shows, or if you've been checking out RotoBaller's YouTube channel for fantasy football seasons past. But here we are, knocking on the door of the 2021 fantasy football season. Drafts right around the corner if you haven't even started already. So it's time to take a look at some ADP analysis, some likes, some dislikes, and some players you can get for a bargain. Guys, don't forget, head over to RotoBaller.com and check out everything we have there. The main page, the premium package, the expert chats. RotoBaller.com has it all for you. Fantasy football or any other sport, baseball, basketball, MMA, esports, NASCAR, PGA, and sports betting. DFS and season-long fans alike, head over to RotoBaller.com as well for whichever your preference is. And sign up for the premium package, whether it's baseball the rest of the way in the second half or to get you ready for the fantasy football season. That premium package, use the promotional code ACES and save yourself a little bit of money in the process. All right, guys. So what I do all summer long, and I've done in the past, and I'll do again this summer if you're new to my shows here on RotoBaller Radio, is I take a look at 3 or 4 players at each position, discuss their ADP, the pros and cons of that ADP, and maybe some bargains you could get a little bit later in the draft. So today, quarterbacks. 4 quarterbacks I want to discuss. Russell Wilson, Ryan Tannehill, Joe Burrow, and Kirk Cousins. Okay, we'll start at the top. Russell Wilson. An ADP average, of course, consensus of different formats. He has an ADP average of QB6, about 50th overall. So in a 12-team format, you're looking at about round 5, round 6. In the FFC, Fantasy Football Championship, okay, he's going as QB6 in general. Now, last season, averaged 23.3 fantasy points per game. Don't worry about total points. Worry about those points per game because week in and week out, that's what you're looking for. He finished 7th overall in fantasy points per game. Attempted 558 passes for 384 yards. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Chris Carson, before he got injured, became more of a pass receiving threat as well out of the backfield for Seattle. Love that completion percentage. Like I said, 384, 558 attempts, 68.8% of his passes. Over 4,200 yards, 40 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. Nothing to be disappointed about there. He averaged 7.5 yards per attempt and 11 yards per completion. Now, people love Russell Wilson for the ground, and I'll be honest with you, his ground game has become, I think, a little overrated. 83 carries, over 500 yards. I'll take the 500 yards, 513 rushing yards, but only 2 rushing touchdowns. Not a big boost in rushing touchdowns. Gives him a total of 42 touchdowns on the season last year. 40 through the air and 2 on the ground. Now, what's the downside to Russell Wilson? Well, you got to be a little careful, a little leery of what happened down the stretch. On the season, remember, 23.3 fantasy points per game. From weeks 10 to 17, your fantasy stretch run, your fantasy playoffs. Russell Wilson fell from 7th to 12th, or he was actually higher than 7th, dropped to 7th, because from weeks 10 to 17, okay, he was 12th in the league in fantasy points per game at just over 17 fantasy points per game. About 6 fantasy points less per game than his season-long average. Disappointing numbers down the stretch. Russell Wilson became very difficult to trust down the stretch of the 2020 fantasy football season. Now, like we said, QB6. Next on my list, Ryan Tannehill of the Tennessee Titans. Probably got the biggest addition here of anybody I'm talking about in the addition of Julio Jones to go opposite A.J. Brown. We know Derrick Henry, Anthony Furcher will take over for Jonnu Smith at the tight end position. Okay, Ryan Tannehill is currently going QB 11. 5 quarterbacks after Russell Wilson. He's going overall 81st. About 30 or so picks after Russell Wilson. 2 to 3 rounds after Russell Wilson. Now, didn't throw the ball nearly as much. Russell Wilson, 558 attempts. Ryan Tannehill only 481. You don't have to throw the ball that much when you have Derrick Henry in the backfield. Okay, 384 completions for Wilson, 315 for Ryan Tannehill. 65.5% of his passes were completed, 3,800 yards, 33 touchdowns to only 7 interceptions. Now, what makes Ryan Tannehill interesting is he averaged 21.9 fantasy points per game last year, finishing 7th, okay, just about tied. Finishing 9th, just behind Russell Wilson. However, in that same period, that same stretch run, that same weeks 10 through 17, he went up about a point more per game and finished 5th. He was reliable weeks 10 to 17, way more reliable than Russell Wilson. Now, here's the best part, is everybody loves looking at Russell Wilson and saying he's a running quarterback. I will tell you this, even though Ryan Tannehill ran the ball only 43 yards for 266 yards, Ryan Tannehill finished last season with 7 rushing touchdowns, giving him a total of 40, only 2 less total touchdowns than Russell Wilson. Okay, when they're on the goal line, Tennessee, you don't have to watch a lot of Titans football to see how this plays out. When they're on the goal line, defense is gearing on Derrick Henry, and Ryan Tannehill walks it in. Again, not saying I like Tannehill better than Russell Wilson, but what I am saying is 30 picks later, I'm getting only 2 less touchdowns and only on a season-long average, 2 less fantasy points per game, 23.3 to 21.9, not even 2 less. We're talking about 1.4 less fantasy points per game 30 picks later. 2 picks later in my draft. Gives me another running back, another wide receiver, however I want to fill it, and I get Ryan Tannehill. Now, with the addition of a second wide receiver opposite A.J. Brown in the name of Hall of Famer Julio Jones. My third quarterback, Joe Burrow of the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, doesn't have the sample like last season. He only played in 10 games, the ACL injury, and I can understand people being afraid of Joe Burrow because of the coming back from the knee injury. He's currently going quarterback 12, one quarterback after Ryan Tannehill. So in a 12-team league, Joe Burrow is being drafted as a starter on average. Overall pick, 89. He's going 39 picks after Russell Wilson and about 7 or 8 picks after Ryan Tannehill. Okay, last season in only 10 games, 264 completions, 404 attempts. He averaged 40 attempts per game. Now this season he gets a healthy Joe Mixon back, an improved offensive line, and along with Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins, Jamar Chase has joined in a very nice and exciting 3 wide receiver set. Okay, he completed 65% of his passes, 2,688 yards. It's about 269 yards per game. Remember, he only played 10, 13 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Averaged just under 18 fantasy points per game, 17.87. Ran for 3 touchdowns on 142 rushing yards. So Joe Burrow, here's the upside. Joe Burrow's the upside play. The former first-round pick, year 2, knee is healthy. The addition of Jamar Chase, the stronger offensive line, and the health of Joe Mixon in the backfield. He averaged 6.7 yards per attempt and 10.2 yards per completion. So let's take a look at the 3 quarterbacks we've mentioned so far. In yards per completion, okay, Joe Burrow, 10.2 yards per completion. Russell Wilson, 11 yards per completion. And Ryan Tannehill, 12.1 yards per completion. Every pass Tannehill completed a little bit further than the other 2 guys. Yards per attempt. Joe Burrow, only 6.7 yards per attempt. Russell Wilson, 7.5 yards per attempt. Ryan Tannehill, a little bit more, 7.9 yards per attempt. Again, not dismissing Russell Wilson, okay, but there is value later if you decide to pass on Russell Wilson at quarterback. My final quarterback, and people are going to roll their eyes and think I'm crazy, but don't underestimate Kirk Cousins of the Minnesota Vikings. Being drafted at quarterback 18. So he's a starter in a 2 QB set, obviously. He is a backup in a 12-team league. He is going overall pick 124. You're talking 74 picks after Russell Wilson. Do the math. It's about 6 rounds later. Okay, he is going. Joe Burrow is overall 89. Ryan Tannehill is overall 81. So he's still going almost over 40 picks later than Ryan Tannehill, who's one of my favorites this year. But listen to the numbers on Kirk Cousins. Okay, 516 attempts, more than Tannehill, more than Burrow, who was injured. Okay, and only about 42 attempts less than Russell Wilson. 349 completions for Kirk Cousins. Okay, about 35 less completions than Russell Wilson. 67.6%. Kirk Cousins' completion percentage has never been an issue. Year 2 of Justin Jefferson. Adam Thielen is still there. Dalvin Cook, a terrific 3-down back in the backfield. Now, he passed, even though it was about 35 less completions, for 4,265 yards, more than any other quarterback on the list. He had 35 touchdown passes, only 5 less than Russell Wilson, 2 more than Ryan Tannehill. 13 interceptions, same amount as Wilson, a few more than Ryan Tannehill. Now, he doesn't run as much, 156 rushing yards, only 1 touchdown. No need to run him when you have Dalvin Cook. Now, here's what's interesting. On the season as a whole, he averaged just under 20 fantasy points a game, 19.95. Placed him 11th, a starter in a 12-team league. Down the stretch, weeks 10 to 17, Kirk Cousins was 3rd in fantasy points per game at the quarterback position with 23.19. Tannehill was 5th. Burrow wasn't playing. Russell Wilson was 12th. Okay? Yards per attempt. Kirk Cousins, 8.3 yards per attempt. More than Tannehill, more than Burrow, more than Russell Wilson. 12.2 yards per completion. A sliv more than Tannehill, more than Wilson, and more than Joe Burrow. The point being, okay, I could understand if you sat here and said, Anthony, I cannot draft Kirk Cousins as my QB1, and that's fine. But you could skip, in my opinion, Russell Wilson, okay, at pick 50. You could go Joe Burrow at 89, Kirk Cousins at 124. And if you're good at streaming your quarterbacks, be just fine. Or you could go Tannehill, Kirk Cousins. Or somewhere else. Maybe you pair Kirk Cousins with a rookie, a Trevor Lawrence, and see if you hit on Lawrence and he becomes the second coming. The fallback that Kirk Cousins is grossly underestimated. Okay? When you consider 5 less touchdown passes, about 54 more passing yards on less completions, more yards per attempt, more yards per completion, and going at about 74 picks after Russell Wilson. It's not that I dislike Russell Wilson. I don't dislike any of these quarterbacks. The price I'm paying for Russell Wilson is not worth the return compared to the price I could pay for a Joe Burrow, a Ryan Tannehill, or especially a Kirk Cousins. All right, everybody, follow me on Twitter at @Aniano Fantasy. And like I said at the start, make sure you head over to RotoBaller.com, sign up for that premium package using the promo code ACES, and check out all the great content there as well. Be sure to stay right here on the RotoBaller Radio YouTube channel and check out all the great baseball, football, and all sorts of content courtesy of the staff at RotoBaller.com. All right, we'll see you next week. We'll break down the running backs and some ADP values and overplays at that position. Stay smart, stay safe. We'll see you next time. Have a good one, folks.